The image of the Roman emperor is often associated with the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius or the military might of Trajan. These are figures carved in marble, symbols of order and civilization. But in the shadow of these giants lie other stories. Stories of rulers whose names have become synonymous with madness and eccentricity. We are talking about Caligula, Nero, and Commodus. Their reigns were not just bad governance. They were a theater of the absurd that shocked even the worldly Romans. They wielded absolute power over the civilized world, and that power seems to have destroyed their own minds. We will delve into a world of palace intrigue, incredible extravagance, and personal whims that cost the empire a fortune. We will see how rulers turn the state treasury into a personal treasure trove for their fantasies. This is a story about what happens when one person has too much power. Watch the video to the end and you'll find out why one emperor seriously considered appointing his horse to the highest government post, how another tried to rebuild the capital of the world into his personal palace, and why a third preferred the arena to the Senate. What if I told you that everything you believed about Caligula is not entirely true? His madness was not born on the day he came to power, but much earlier in a suffocating atmosphere of paranoia and fear. The young Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, nicknamed Caligula, ate a boot by his soldiers, was the son of the beloved commander Germanicus. He spent his childhood in military camps, but his youth was spent in what could be called a golden cage. After his father's mysterious disappearance and his mother's harsh treatment, Caligula was effectively taken hostage by Emperor Tiberius. He lived on the famous island of Capri in a luxurious villa that served as Tiberius's fortress and place of seclusion. It was not a paradise island. It was a place where everyone feared everyone else, and rumors of secret orders and sudden disappearances were commonplace. Caligula grew up watching the aging emperor rule the empire from afar, relying on denunciations and intrigues. He saw how easily a person could lose everything with a single word. This atmosphere could not fail to leave a deep mark on the young man's psyche. He learned to hide his true thoughts behind a mask of obsequiousness. His contemporaries noted that he was a natural actor. He played the role of a loyal heir perfectly, anticipating Tiberius's wishes. At the same time, he watched as his older brothers were removed from the political arena one by one. Caligula understood the main lesson of Capri. To survive, you have to be cunning, inconspicuous, and trust no one. It was on Capri, far from Rome, that he developed a total contempt for the senatorial class. He saw how these noble men humiliated themselves before Tiberius in order to preserve their position. He saw that fear was a more effective tool of control than respect. This philosophy formed the basis of his future reign. Many historians believe that the constant tension and the need to wear a mask broke him. When Tiberius left this world in 37 AD and Caligula suddenly became the sole ruler, he did not just gain power. He gained the opportunity to finally take off his mask and take revenge on the world for his fear. His early life is not an excuse, but a key to understanding. He was not insane from birth. He was a product of the system created by Tiberius. He saw the worst manifestations of absolute power and, having obtained it, decided not just to use it, but to take it to the point of absurdity. This chapter is not about his famous follies, but about their origins. Power did not corrupt Caligula. It simply gave him the opportunity to be himself. He was a product of an era of suspicion, and he brought that atmosphere with him from Capri to Rome. It was an unusual story of coming to power, full of dark secrets. But what happened when he gained that power? What broke him completely? I'm very interested to hear your point of view. Do you think that the environment and surroundings can completely shape the personality of a future ruler? Or did he have destructive tendencies from the outset? Write about it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our research. Are you ready to learn the truth about how, in just a few months, the people's favorite turned into an object of universal fear? The beginning of Caligula's reign in 37 AD was a real honeymoon period for Rome. After the gloomy and suspicious reign of Tiberius, the young Gaius Caesar, known as Caligula, seemed like a breath of fresh air. He immediately began to live up to expectations. He pardoned many political prisoners who had been condemned by Tiberius. He also abolished a number of unpopular taxes and spent vast sums on grandiose gladiatorial combats and spectacles. The Romans literally adored him. In the young emperor, they saw the living return of his glorious father, Germanicus. Germanicus was one of Rome's most beloved generals, and his tragic death made him a legend. But this honeymoon did not last long. Just 7 months after his triumphant rise to power, Caligula fell seriously ill. This event plunged the entire empire into shock and fear. Ancient sources such as Suetonius describe this illness as a severe brain fever. Of course, we do not know the exact modern diagnosis. It could have been encephalitis, meningitis, or another serious nervous disorder that affected the brain. All of Rome prayed fervently for his recovery, with people making vows to the gods, offering their own lives in exchange. The empire held its breath, fearing the worst. In the end, he recovered physically. However, Caligula emerged from his illness a completely different person. Those who had known him before did not recognize the emperor. It was a sudden and frightening transformation that everyone noticed. The charming, friendly, and generous young man whom Rome had loved had disappeared without a trace. He no longer sought the approval of the crowd or the Senate. His behavior became unpredictable and cruel. In his place appeared a capricious, suspicious, and incredibly arrogant ruler. He became quick-tempered and began to show clear signs of paranoia. This change proved fatal for Rome. It was after this mysterious illness that his famous megalomania began. He stopped behaving like a Roman magistrate. He began to demand honors for himself that were beyond human limits. His predecessors, Augustus and Tiberius, ruled as princes, that is, first among equals. They formally preserved republican traditions. Caligula, however, demonstratively broke this contract. He demanded to be worshipped as a living deity right here and now. This was unheard of in Roman tradition. He wanted to be not just a ruler, but a god on earth. First, Caligula ordered the famous statues of Greek gods to be brought to Rome. He ordered their heads to be replaced with his own image. In this way, he directly placed himself in the place of Zeus or Apollo. But that was not enough for him. He built a temple in his honor on Palatine Hill. It was a temple dedicated to him as a living god, where his golden statue stood. He established a special priestly college to perform his own cult. The most distinguished and wealthy senators were forced to buy the right to become priests for huge sums of money. This was not only blasphemy, but also a form of financial extortion. He began to appear regularly in public in the guise of various gods. He wore the robes and attributes of Jupiter, Hercules, and Neptune. He demanded that he be addressed in accordance with his divine image. Stories have been preserved about how he conducted conversations with the statue of Jupiter, Capitolinus. He could stand for hours in the temple, addressing the chief god of Rome. These conversations were often strange in nature. Sometimes he would threaten the statue or argue with it, demanding to be recognized as its equal. For the Romans, who took their traditional religion very seriously, this was shocking blasphemy. It undermined the very foundations of the state. His deification of himself went hand in hand with the humiliation of the aristocracy. He demonstratively and methodically humiliated the Senate. He saw the senators not as partners in government, but as his slaves. He could force the most respected senators dressed in togas to run after his chariot for several miles. This was an unheard of insult to people of their status. He enjoyed their helplessness. He openly said that he could do whatever he wanted with any of them. The fear he had absorbed while living on Capri under Tiberius's oppression, he now projected onto others. He took revenge on them for the years of his own humiliation. The most famous and absurd symbol of his contempt for the Senate was his attitude toward his beloved horse, Incitatus. It was his personal racehorse. The emperor spent a fortune on it. The horse lived in a luxurious marble stable. He had servants and purple blankets. He ate barley mixed with gold flakes from an ivory trough. He drank from a golden trough. Caligula even forced senators to treat the horse as an honored guest. They had to come to Incitatus's receptions and wish him good health. The culmination of this theater of the absurd was his announcement that he planned to make Incitatus a consul. The position of consul was the highest office in the Roman Republic. It was the main symbol of the Senate's power. This was not just the whim of a madman. It was malicious, deliberate sarcasm. It was the highest manifestation of his contempt for the Senate. In this way, he demonstrated that his horse could govern no worse than the senators. He showed that he considered them useless, corrupt, and cowardly. He devalued the highest authority. This transformation from the hope of the nation to its nightmare was incredibly rapid and irreversible. In just a few months, Rome lost its darling. In his place appeared a monster that everyone feared. Historians still argue about the reasons. Illness probably exacerbated the severe psychological trauma of his youth. He grew up in an atmosphere of fear, watching Tiberius destroy his family. Absolute power, unchecked by anyone, opened Pandora's box. He had neither a senate nor advisors who could stop him. All the power of the empire was in the hands of a man with no internal restraints. Do you think it was a real mental illness caused by fever? Or did Caligula simply realize that he could do anything he wanted and began to take revenge on the world for his terrible past? This question remains one of the most intriguing in the history of Rome. But deifying himself and mocking the Senate was only the beginning. Are you ready to find out how absurd his war with the gods and nature itself became? I will reveal the best-kept secret. What if the famous war with the sea was not madness, but a cunning political move? Most historians describe Caligula's campaign in Germany and on the shores of the English Channel as a complete farce. Instead of fighting battles, he allegedly staged performances and then, approaching the sea, declared war on Neptune. According to Suetonius, he ordered the legionaries to attack the water. The soldiers chopped at the waves with their swords and threw spears at them. After this victory, Caligula ordered them to collect trophies, seashells. He returned to Rome and demanded a triumph for his great victory over the ocean. This seems like pure madness, but some modern historians offer a different, more unique interpretation. Perhaps Caligula was not so crazy after all. This campaign was organized to suppress a real conspiracy among the troops on the Rhine. When Caligula arrived, the conspiracy had already been uncovered and the instigators eliminated. But the legions were still restless. The emperor needed to assert his authority, but starting a real war, for example, in Britain, was risky. What if the war with the sea was an act of sophisticated humiliation? The emperor, aware of the soldiers' disloyalty, forced them to carry out the most absurd and humiliating order imaginable. He showed them that his power over them was absolute, that they would obey his every command, no matter how ridiculous it might be. In this interpretation, collecting shells was not a trophy, but a symbol of their subjugation. He forced the proud legionnaires, conquerors of the world, to dig in the sand like children. It was a psychological operation, not an attack of madness. Another of his insane projects was the construction of a pontoon bridge across the Gulf of Naples in the Bay Area. Caligula ordered hundreds of merchant ships from across the empire to be gathered. They were lined up in 2 rows and tied together, creating a bridge almost 3 miles long. Caligula rode back and forth across this bridge for 2 days in a row. On the first day, he wore the armor of Alexander the Great. On the second, he wore the garb of a charioteer. This cost the treasury a colossal amount of money and paralyzed grain deliveries to Rome, as all the ships were requisitioned. The official explanation was that an astrologer had predicted that Caligula had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the bottom of the bay. Caligula decided to literally refute the prediction. He showed that nothing was impossible for him, a god. But there is also a pragmatic version. It was a demonstration of power. He showed the Senate and the people that he could do anything he wanted. He could conquer the sea, he could walk on water, he could stop all trade in the empire on a whim. Whether it was madness or the cold calculation of a tyrant, we will never know. But these projects completely emptied the treasury that Tiberius had left him full. And it was this extravagance, not just eccentricity, that led to his inglorious end. What you are about to learn will change your perception of Roman emperors. If Caligula shocked Rome with his arrogance, Nero shocked it with his love of art. In a world where war, politics, and jurisprudence were the highest virtues for a Roman man, the young emperor Nero dreamed of something else. He was not at all attracted to military campaigns or boring debates in the Senate. He sincerely wanted to be an actor, singer, poet, and charioteer. He did not want to rule, but to perform on stage. This passion was completely alien and incomprehensible to the harsh Roman ruling class. Raised by the famous Stoic philosopher Seneca, Nero seemed like the perfect ruler in the early years of his reign. This period, known as the Nero-Pentarchy, was a time of relative calm and prosperity. He listened to his mentor and his praetorian prefect Burrus. The emperor was merciful, popular with the people, and initially avoided conflict with the Senate. But beneath this respectable mask lay the soul of an artist. This soul craved not the silent respect of the aristocracy, but the thunderous applause of the crowd. For a Roman aristocrat, and even more so for an emperor, public performance on stage was an unheard-of disgrace. It was considered an occupation unworthy of a free Roman citizen. Actors, musicians, and gladiators in Rome were legally at the bottom of the social ladder. They were considered infamia, that is, disgraced people, almost on a par with slaves. But Nero did not just appreciate their art as a spectator. He wanted to be one of them. He wanted to stand in the spotlight himself and feel the adoration of the public. At first, he began with private, closed performances in his palace. These were rehearsals that he arranged for a small circle of courtiers. He sang long arias, recited poems of his own composition, and accompanied himself on the lyre. He sincerely considered himself an unsurpassed master of these arts. The courtiers, of course, were forced to applaud wildly. They vied with each other to praise his divine voice. Refusal to praise him could cost them their careers or even their lives. But Nero was not satisfied with this false flattery. He craved a real, mass audience. He wanted not only flatterers, but all of Rome to see his talent. Despite Seneca's quiet protests and the open shock of the entire Senate, he began to perform in public. It was an unprecedented step that broke all the centuries-old traditions. He established the Neronii, his own games based on the Greek model. Unlike the bloody Roman gladiatorial fights, here they competed in music, poetry, and athletics. The emperor, the ruler of the world, personally participated in these competitions. He took the stage alongside professional actors and poets. Of course, he always won. The judges simply did not dare to give the victory to anyone else. Any result other than first place was unthinkable and dangerous. Special units were created, the so-called Augustans. These were thousands of young people who were supposed to support the emperor during his performances. They set the rhythm of the applause and shouted praise. The culmination of his artistic career was a major tour of Greece. He considered Greece to be the true home of the arts. In his opinion, only the Greeks could truly appreciate his genius. He participated in all major games, including the most prestigious, the Olympic Games. He competed in singing, recitation, and of course, chariot racing. The Greeks, being more skilled in flattery, awarded him all the first prizes. There is a story that he won the races even when he fell off his chariot and did not reach the finish line. Nero treated his artistic talents with maniacal seriousness. It was not just a hobby for him, it was his main mission in life. He followed a strict actor's diet and did special exercises for his voice. He was terribly afraid of catching a cold and losing his divine timbre. During his long performances in the theater, the doors were locked. No one could leave, even if they felt ill. Sources report that people pretended to be dead so that they could be carried out of the hall. The Roman elite, the senators, were in silent horror. They saw the authority of the supreme power, Maestas, crumbling before their eyes. The emperor, a descendant of the divine Augustus, behaved like a wandering artist. He disgraced the name of the Julii Claudii by performing for a laurel wreath like some Greek actor. For them, this was worse than Caligula's cruelty. Tyranny could be endured, but this disgrace was humiliating for the entire empire. The emperor made Rome a laughingstock in the eyes of the whole world. But Nero himself did not care at all. He was absorbed in his world of art. He sincerely considered senators to be boring and talentless people, incapable of understanding the sublime. He built grandiose theaters and gymnasiums based on the Greek model. He spent huge sums of money from the treasury on his productions, the expensive costumes, and foreign tours. Art became his main passion, his obsession. This obsession gradually supplanted all boring state affairs. He was no longer interested in ruling a huge empire. What do you think is worse for a state? A tyrant ruler or an artist ruler who ignores his duties for the sake of the stage? But this obsession with art was only a prelude. In the next chapter, we will see how this passion for grandiose projects led to one of the greatest disasters in the history of Rome. In 64 AD, a terrible disaster struck Rome. A fire broke out in the area of the Great Circus. The fire quickly spread to the densely populated areas of the city. This event went down in history as the Great Fire of Rome. The fire raged for 6 days and 7 nights. Of the 14 districts of Rome, 3 were completely destroyed and 7 were seriously damaged. Thousands of people were left homeless and without means of subsistence. The Eternal City, the capital of the world, lay in ruins. During this disaster, Nero was at his villa in Anzio. When he learned of the scale of the tragedy, he returned to the city. The emperor organized camps for the fire victims, opened his gardens to them, and ensured the delivery of cheap food. However, ominous rumors began to spread among the people. It was said that someone had seen the emperor's men preventing the fire from being extinguished. A legend arose that Nero himself, standing on a tower, watched the fire and, inspired by the spectacle, recited a poem about the fall of Troy. Historians such as Tacitus are skeptical of this rumor, but it fits well with the image of the emperor as an artist. The people were convinced that Nero himself had set fire to the city. The reason? He wanted to make room for his new grandiose project. Immediately after the fire, Nero began to realize his dream. On a huge burned-out area in the very center of the city, he ordered the construction of not just a palace, but an entire complex that went down in history as the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. It was not a palace in the usual sense, but rather a giant country villa transplanted into the heart of the capital. The complex included an artificial lake, pastures, forests, and parks. The buildings were decorated with incredible luxury. The walls were covered with gold and precious stones. One of the banquet halls had a rotating ceiling that imitated the movement of the heavenly bodies. In another, flower petals fell from the ceiling and fragrant oil poured down. In the palace lobby stood a colossal statue of Nero himself in the image of the sun god. Its height, according to various estimates, reached 35 meters. The scale of this construction was unprecedented. The Romans were furious. They complained that the emperor was building his own personal paradise on the ashes of their homes. All of Italy was burdened with new taxes to finance this construction. Temples in the provinces were plundered to obtain gold for decorating the palace. The Golden House became a symbol of Nero's selfishness and detachment from reality. He saw himself as a great architect and artist rebuilding Rome. The people saw him as a man feasting on their grief. This construction project finally destroyed his reputation. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how one man's personal whims can affect an entire empire? Nero's personal life was as staged as his public appearances on stage. He lived in a world of illusions that he had created for himself. While his predecessors valued wise advisors, Nero sought something else. He surrounded himself not with statesmen, but with actors, poets, and favorites. These people were far removed from the actual running of the state. Their main task was to indulge his tastes and praise his talents. They created an atmosphere of flattery around him that only exacerbated his detachment from reality. His relationship with his mother, Agrippina, was extremely tense and complicated. She was a powerful woman who literally paved the way for him to the throne. It is believed that she poisoned Claudius so that her son could become emperor. Agrippina did not want to relinquish real control over the empire. She tried to rule alongside him, which was unthinkable for Rome. This conflict between mother and son grew over the years. In the end, this confrontation led to dire consequences for Agrippina. Nero, fearing her influence, arranged for her murder. He proved that he would not tolerate competition even from his own family. He acted just as ruthlessly toward his first wife, Octavia. She was the daughter of the previous emperor, Claudius. This marriage was important for the legitimacy of his power. Octavia was modest and very popular with the people, but Nero did not appreciate her. He fell madly in love with Poppaea Sabina. This ambitious aristocrat demanded the status of empress. To clear the way for his new marriage, Nero first exiled Octavia. Then he accused her of treason and ordered her to be killed. He removed her from his path just as he had done with his mother. But even these family tragedies, though severe, did not shock Rome as much as his subsequent actions. Murders in the imperial family were nothing new, but what Nero did next was beyond the pale. After Poppaea left this world, Nero found a young freedman named Sporus. This young man bore a striking resemblance to the late empress. The emperor ordered doctors to perform surgery on Sporus to make him look like a woman. He began to openly treat him as his lawful wife. It was an unprecedented act. Nero did not hide this relationship. He held a public wedding ceremony in Greece. During the ceremony, Spore was dressed in the full regalia of an empress. For conservative Roman society, this was unheard of. The Romans valued mos maiorum, or the traditions of their ancestors above all else. This marriage was a mockery of the very foundations of the Roman family. It was not just a personal whim, but an open challenge to all norms of morality and decency. Nero demonstratively showed that he was above any laws. He could do what was forbidden to everyone else. Parallel to this moral decay at the top, a severe financial crisis was unfolding. The empire was rapidly becoming poorer. Nero's passions cost the state a fortune. The construction of his golden house, a palace of unprecedented luxury, consumed the budget. Endless festivals, gifts to his favorites, and generous handouts to the people emptied the treasury. An artistic tour of Greece also required enormous sums of money. The treasury, which had already suffered greatly after the Great Fire of Rome, was completely empty. Nero needed money, and he was willing to get it by any means necessary. He did not care about his responsibility for the economy. To cover his expenses, Nero resorted to desperate measures. He did not cut back on spending. Instead, he decided to debase the very money with which the empire paid. He initiated the first major currency devaluation in Roman history. It was a financial reform that had far-reaching consequences. The emperor found a way to pay with less gold and silver. He ordered the weight of gold ore and silver denarii to be reduced. Moreover, he ordered the precious metal content to be lowered by adding copper to the alloy. It was a risky move that undermined confidence in Roman money. The debasement of coins was not enough. Nero resumed the practice of prosecuting wealthy senators. This was a tried and tested method used by tyrants to quickly enrich themselves at the expense of others. Any wealthy person could be accused of conspiring against the emperor. Accusations of insulting the majesty also became popular. Any careless gesture or word could be used as a pretext. After a guilty verdict, the convicted person's property was confiscated in favor of the treasury. This created an atmosphere of sticky fear in high society. These repressions were comparable to the worst times of Caligula's reign. While senators feared for their lives, ordinary people suffered from something else. Rome and the provinces groaned under the burden of increased taxes. The empire had to pay for the whims of its ruler. Nero, however, seemed completely oblivious to this. He lived in his own world. He was absorbed in rehearsals, the construction of the Golden House, and plans for new festivals. His detachment from reality became total. Complaints from provincial governors simply did not reach him. He considered state affairs to be a boring routine that interfered with his art. What is more dangerous for a state, a financial crisis or the moral decline demonstrated by its leader? Rome faced both of these challenges at the same time, but the emperor's personal life and empty treasury were only part of the overall problem. They were symptoms of a disease that had struck the very center of power. In the next chapter, we will learn how all this blatant mismanagement and disregard for problems led to the empire beginning to fall apart at the seams. Nero's reign was marked not only by internal crises, but also by serious upheavals in the provinces. Although the emperor himself rarely left Italy, preferring the stage to the battlefield, his governors waged difficult wars. These conflicts were a direct consequence of his indifference to public affairs. The most serious test was the uprising in Britain, led by Queen Boudica. The Roman administration in the province behaved extremely imprudently, which led to mass discontent. The rebellious tribes inflicted serious damage on the Roman legions and threatened the entire Roman presence on the island. It took enormous effort in the transfer of troops to suppress the uprising. Although the Romans ultimately prevailed, Britain was devastated. This conflict showed what happens when there is no clear control from the central government. Another major conflict broke out in Judea. Tensions that had been building up for years erupted into open rebellion. Nero was forced to send his best commander, Vespasian, to restore order. This war dragged on for years and had far-reaching consequences. On the eastern borders, the confrontation with Parthia over control of Armenia continued. The commander Corbulo led a difficult campaign there. Although it ended in a compromised peace, it also required constant attention and resources. Nero himself was more concerned with his tour of Greece at the time. He spent more than a year there competing in music competitions. Meanwhile, a conspiracy known as the Pisonian conspiracy was brewing in Rome, involving many prominent senators and military leaders. Although the conspiracy was uncovered, it revealed the depth of dissatisfaction with the emperor. Numerous trials followed. Many prominent figures, including Nero's former mentor Seneca, were forced to commit suicide. Financial crisis worsened. To cover his expenses, Nero resorted to ever-increasing taxes. This caused discontent not only in the Senate, but also in the army. The legions, which were the mainstay of power, began to doubt their emperor. In 68 AD, the cup of patience overflowed. The governor of Gaul, Julius Vindex, raised a rebellion. Although his uprising was suppressed, he was supported by Galba, the governor of Spain. The legions proclaimed Galba emperor. Nero found himself isolated. The Senate, which he had despised for so long, grew bold and declared him an enemy of the state. The Praetorian Guard, bribed by Galba's supporters, abandoned him. The emperor-actor fled Rome. Abandoned by all, he ended up in a country villa. Upon learning that the Senate had sent soldiers to arrest him, he decided to take his own life. According to legend, his last words were, "What a great artist is perishing." After the chaos that followed Nero's departure and the era of the Flavians and the five good emperors, Rome seemed to have found stability. The pinnacle of this golden age was the reign of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, a Stoic on the throne. He was the embodiment of Roman virtue, educated, reserved, devoted to duty. This philosopher had a son, Lucius Aelius Aurelius Commodus. For the first time in almost a century, power was to pass not to an adopted heir chosen for his merits, but to a direct relative. And this turned out to be a fatal mistake. Commodus was the complete opposite of his father. While Marcus Aurelius spent years on military campaigns on the Danube, defending the empire, Commodus hated war. He craved peace at any cost, but not for the good of the empire, but in order to return to Rome as soon as possible to its pleasures and luxuries. As soon as Marcus Aurelius left this world, probably from the plague, the 18-year-old Commodus immediately made peace with the Germanic tribes. He abandoned all his father's conquests and hurried to the capital. The Senate and the army were disappointed, but the people welcomed the young emperor, tired of endless war. In Rome, Commodus quickly showed his true colors. He had no interest in state affairs whatsoever. He entrusted the administration of the empire to his favorites, first to the Praetorian prefect Perennis, and then to the freedman Cleander. These men used their positions for personal gain. They traded offices, senatorial titles, and court decisions. Corruption reached unprecedented levels. Chaos reigned in the empire, while the emperor indulged in entertainment. Commodus was obsessed with his physical strength. He was tall, stately, and proud of his appearance. His idol was the mythological hero Hercules. He spent his time not in Senate meetings but in training. Unlike Nero, who saw himself as an artist, Commodus saw himself as the greatest warrior. Gladiatorial combat became his passion, but he did not want to be just a spectator. He wanted to be a participant. This was even more shameful for Roman society than Nero's singing. Gladiators were slaves or prisoners, people at the very bottom of society. The emperor, the father of the fatherland, voluntarily placed himself on the same level as them. At first, he trained and performed in closed imperial estates, but like Nero, he soon needed an audience. He began to enter the arena of the Colosseum. Commodus's obsession with the arena quickly turned into a mania. He didn't just participate in the fights, he lived for them. His performances were carefully staged spectacles designed to demonstrate his divine strength and agility. He entered the arena dressed as Hercules, with a lion's skin on his shoulders and a club in his hands. Senators were required to attend these performances and cheer for the gladiator emperor. This was an unprecedented humiliation for the Roman aristocracy. His opponents in the arena were not real gladiators. They were either specially trained people who only pretended to resist, or cripples who could not pose any threat to him. He fought them using safe weapons. He also liked to perform as a beast fighter, fighting wild animals. But here too, everything was arranged for his safety. He shot animals with a bow from a safe platform, protected by fences. In a single day, he could defeat hundreds of animals. The Roman crowd, fond of spectacles, initially welcomed him, but even for them, this was too much. It was one thing for the emperor to provide entertainment, but quite another for the emperor himself to be the entertainment. His popularity among the people began to decline. For his performances in the arena, Commodus demanded a huge fee from the treasury, as if he were a hired gladiator. It was a mockery of common sense. The treasury, already depleted by his favorites, was bursting at the seams. The culmination of his megalomania was his identification with Hercules. He ordered that he be called not Commodus, but Hercules, son of Jupiter. He demanded to be addressed as a god. He ordered Rome to be renamed. The city was to be called Colonia Commodiana. Even the months of the year were renamed in his honor, using his numerous titles, Amazonian, Hercules, and so on. The Senate was horrified but remained silent. Anyone who dared to express the slightest disapproval immediately fell out of favor. The atmosphere in Rome became as oppressive as it had been under Caligula. The emperor was completely detached from reality. He lived in his own fantasy world, where he was a god, the greatest warrior, and the savior of Rome. He even ordered statues to be made depicting him as Hercules. While the emperor played gladiator, the empire descended into chaos. The army was discontented, the provinces rebelled, and conspiracies brewed in Rome. His reign was a parody of his father's. Commodus' complete indifference to public affairs and his scandalous behavior could not continue forever. He turned all segments of society against him: the Senate, which he humiliated, the army, which he ignored, and even his own court. The first serious conspiracy against him matured at the very beginning of his reign. His own sister Lucilla was involved in it. She was dissatisfied with Commodus's removal of her from power. The conspiracy failed, but it showed Commodus that he could trust no one, not even his family. This incident made the emperor even more suspicious and volatile. He began to rely on the Praetorian prefects, who quickly gained enormous power. The first was Perennis, who effectively ruled the empire while Commodus entertained himself. However, the army rebelled against Perennis, and Commodus, frightened, handed his favorite over to be torn apart by the soldiers. He was replaced by Cleander, a freedman who took corruption to the extreme. He sold everything: citizenship, offices, courts. Cleander's reign ended during the bread riots in Rome. The crowd, driven to despair by food shortages, demanded his head. Commodus, once again fearing for his life, sacrificed this favorite as well. After that, Commodus stopped trusting anyone. He surrounded himself only with his closest servants and gladiators. His suspicion turned into mania. The lists of those he suspected of disloyalty grew longer every day. The last years of his reign were marked by complete chaos. The emperor was preoccupied only with his performances in the arena and his plans to rename Rome. No one felt safe. In 92 AD, his patience ran out. The new Praetorian prefect, Aemilius Paetus, the court administrator, and Commodus's favorite Marcia, realized that they were next on the list. The emperor planned to eliminate them and celebrate the new year in the gladiator barracks. They decided to act first. A conspiracy was hatched. The reign of the gladiator emperor was cut short. His departure from life was as inglorious as his reign. The Senate immediately cursed his memory. All his statues were smashed, and the names he had given to Rome and the months were abolished. The empire breathed a sigh of relief, but not for long. With Commodus's departure, the Antonine dynasty and the golden age of Rome came to an end. The next day, a power struggle began that plunged the empire into the chaos of a civil war known as the Year of the Five Emperors. Commodus was not just a bad ruler. He destroyed the stability that his father had spent his entire life building. We have looked at three stories, those of Caligula, Nero, and Commodus. Each of them illustrates in its own way what happens when absolute power falls into the hands of a person who is not ready for it. Whether it was psychological trauma, artistic egoism, or childish indifference to duty, the result was the same. Their reigns were not just a series of mistakes. They were grandiose spectacles that cost the Roman Empire dearly. They squandered the treasury on absurd projects, humiliated the institutions of power, and placed their personal whims above the welfare of millions of people. These emperors are a constant reminder that the greatness of a state depends not only on its armies and laws, but also on the adequacy of those at the helm. Their follies are not just curiosities of history, but harsh lessons about the nature of power. Whose story shocked you the most? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new research into the most controversial pages of the past.